Hi, everybody, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode number 487. I am Shel Holtz.
And I'm Neville Hobson. In this episode 487, we have a story that's less about technology itself and more about what happens when you pause to think about the pace of it all. A few days ago, Martin Waxman published a reflective piece on LinkedIn called Knowing Where to Start and When to Make a Shift. Martin, as many of you will know, is a Canadian digital strategy consultant and LinkedIn learning instructor. He was our guest in an FIR interview in January. Martin writes the AI and Digital Marketing Trends newsletter, which has become one of LinkedIn's most successful, now reaching well over 500,000 subscribers. It began humbly in 2020 when Martin set out to explore the intersection of AI and marketing at a time when few others were doing so. His goal was to reach maybe 10,000 readers. He's now 50 times past that. But this isn't a story of relentless growth or scaling up. It's the opposite. We'll explore this next. Martin's post isn't a farewell, it's an adjustment. After years of writing about AI's impact, he's decided to slow the pace of his newsletter and make space for deeper thinking. In his words, the AI conversation has moved from a path less followed to a crowded superhighway. Everyone seems to be writing about the same things, and the constant noise can be exhausting. So he's taking stock, reevaluating his direction, reshaping his LinkedIn learning course, and thinking about how to bring a fresh human perspective to the next stage of this conversation. There's a generosity and humility in that move that feels rare. He talks about resisting the temptation to let AI do the thinking for us. Stop relying on AI as a crutch. Embrace the blank page. Don't give up on your brain. Creativity and discernment still start with people, not prompts. And he's choosing to slow down, to step back from the rapid churn of publishing and make room for curiosity, quality, and quiet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode number 487. I am Shel Holtz.
And I'm Neville Hobson. In this episode 487, we have a story that's less about technology itself and more about what happens when you pause to think about the pace of it all. A few days ago, Martin Waxman published a reflective piece on LinkedIn called Knowing Where to Start and When to Make a Shift. Martin, as many of you will know, is a Canadian digital strategy consultant and LinkedIn learning instructor. He was our guest in an FIR interview in January. Martin writes the AI and Digital Marketing Trends newsletter, which has become one of LinkedIn's most successful, now reaching well over 500,000 subscribers. It began humbly in 2020 when Martin set out to explore the intersection of AI and marketing at a time when few others were doing so. His goal was to reach maybe 10,000 readers. He's now 50 times past that. But this isn't a story of relentless growth or scaling up. It's the opposite. We'll explore this next. Martin's post isn't a farewell, it's an adjustment. After years of writing about AI's impact, he's decided to slow the pace of his newsletter and make space for deeper thinking. In his words, the AI conversation has moved from a path less followed to a crowded superhighway. Everyone seems to be writing about the same things, and the constant noise can be exhausting. So he's taking stock, reevaluating his direction, reshaping his LinkedIn learning course, and thinking about how to bring a fresh human perspective to the next stage of this conversation. There's a generosity and humility in that move that feels rare today. He talks about resisting the temptation to let AI do the thinking for us. Stop relying on AI as a crutch, he writes. Embrace the blank page. Don't give up on your brain. He's reminding us that creativity and discernment still start with people, not prompts. And he's choosing to slow down, to step back from the rapid churn of publishing and make room for curiosity, quality, and quiet. That theme of slowing down connects powerfully with a discussion that I led in September in an IABC webinar on redefining what work means. I suggested that maybe the answer isn't in doing more or moving faster, but in taking the time to notice, reflect, and realign what we do with what really matters. Martin's story feels like a practical expression of that, a kind of intentional deceleration that invites us to think more deeply about purpose and pace in our own professional lives. So as we unpack his post today, perhaps the real question isn't just about how communicators keep up with AI. It's about how we decide when to slow down, how to add meaning amid abundance, and what to let go of so our work and our thinking can stay human. With everyone producing AI-related content, Martin's pivot reflects a move from volume to value. How can communicators preserve credibility and originality when audiences are saturated with near-identical insights? Martin's post isn't just about pausing. It's about reclaiming agency in how we learn, create, and lead with AI. It invites communicators to redefine productivity, not by the speed of output, but by the depth of thought.
I was very taken with Martin's post, and I'm very happy for him that he has come to terms with this and made some decisions in his life that will make him happier. It's not for me, however. I see this notion of slowing down as he positioned it in two ways. One, there's slowing down so that you can take the time to produce quality outputs, quality content. I confess that I use AI to write things that I don't want to take the time to do. They're not important enough that I need to be the author of these things. They are fairly rote things. I've taken notes. I give it to AI. It cranks out a serviceable first draft. I take 20, 30, 40 minutes to edit it and revise it, and I'm done, rather than putting in 2 or 3 hours on this thing. Nobody has ever questioned the provenance of these articles or this content. In fact, I have gotten some praise over some of it, which makes me chuckle a little. But I do this so that I will have the time to appreciate the blank page and write the things where I think it is important that it be me at the keyboard in my voice writing these things. But the other way to look at this is just slowing down in life. And for that, again, I appreciate people who want to do that. I appreciate people who need to do that. And I especially appreciate people who find a way to do that to accommodate that need. I want to go faster myself. That's just me. I want more hours in the day to get more stuff done. If I'm not being productive, I feel at loose ends. I feel anxious. I wonder, what can I be doing now? In fact, I just experienced this weekend. I had a very sleepless night, and I got up and I said, geez, I'm really tired. And I went into the garage for something, and I was looking around and going, I need to move that box over there. And I started doing it. And the next thing I knew, I had been straightening up the garage for an hour. And this is just my personality. I have to be doing something almost all the time. So I think you have to look at what's right for you in making this kind of decision. I wouldn't feel pressured to slow down if you don't want to, if that's not going to make you happy. But I think Martin's prescription is a good one for people who are overloaded and overwhelmed. And I certainly understand his interest in dialing back the commentary on AI when so many people are cranking out similar content. I don't know that everybody's cranking out exactly what Martin is. He has a unique perspective. He is a thought leader. He tends to be ahead of the curve. I would continue to pay attention to him. But yeah, you scroll through LinkedIn and it's got to be 2/3 of the posts that I see have one angle on AI or another.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand you. I've known you a long time, Shel, so I know you have these anxiousness about not doing stuff. I was like that. And in fact, your point is absolutely spot on what you said. Each person, this applies to individuals. It's not like a kind of a, how you do this that is valid for everyone. The starting point, which is what I went through, is you've got to want to do this change, to make this change. You've got to want to change something in your life, whether it is professionally or personally or a combination of both. I think it should be probably a combination of both. I've gone through that since the move that we made a year ago to this rural part of southwest England compared to the urban busyness area we were in before. But more significantly, that's part of the catalyzing effect that led to the changes I made, which is why Martin's post resonated so strongly with me when I read it. So now I take a lot of time to decide on doing things that I need to do, that I want to do, but not to the extent that I absolutely have to do that right now. I used to be like that. And I used to be sitting in my workspace late at night or up in the morning. And I still do that. But that's now because if I feel like doing that, it is not every day I'm doing that. So I've also got the advantage of having decided to make changes that I can actually do those things and still pay the bills and do all that kind of stuff. So I spend more time with my grandkids, with my wife than I ever did before, and take days off in the work week and work on a Sunday. I mean, I've always kind of done that, but I'm now doing it with better purpose. But I think going back to the webinar or seminar I did for IABC, that was interesting because that was about redesigning your work and in fact, your life, basically. Doing things such as what Martin described fits into that bucket that I discussed in the IABC event. But one of the interesting things, Shel, we did a literally instant poll at the beginning of the webinar after people knew what the webinar was for, why they were there, and what they wanted to get out of it. And one of the questions asked was, how aligned do you feel with your current work? And third, as 33% said, I feel aligned. My work reflects my values and my energy. But 60% said, I'm actively rethinking how and why I work. And a further 7% were stronger views. I feel stuck or disconnected from what matters. So basically, if I summarize it, only a third of those asked feel aligned with what they're doing. 60%, so nearly 2/3 are actively rethinking how and why they work. And some of those have a stronger opinion that they feel completely disconnected. And indeed, in the chat, a number of people were saying, well, now they feel they need to question some of the things that they haven't been, and they're not happy. So let's do things that make you happy, to your point. Not everyone has the luxury of doing that. I realize that. But there are some things you can control, and this is where this comes in. I think where I stood on this, hence the discussion with the IBC group, was this isn't like a whole life change thing. It's not like what was popular back in 10, 15 years ago, the quantifiable self. I remember there were consultants like nobody's business, books like nobody's business on that topic. We're seeing that now again on how to reinvent yourself and your life and be happy and all that kind of stuff. You actually don't need any of that, in my view. Sorry, all those book authors out there, but you don't need to do that. This is incremental things, small things, steps at a time. It's not whole-scale change, although that might work for you. So what Martin's doing, as I'm interpreting from his LinkedIn post, is a small step pivot to a different way of doing his newsletter and his LinkedIn courses. He says in his post, for the next little while, I love Canadians use words like the next little while. That's a great phrase, not pinning yourself down to a specific. He says he's slowing down his publishing frequency from twice a month to a less regular schedule. So I'm assuming that means probably once a month or maybe once every month and a bit, perhaps, as he says, or until something strikes my fancy and gets me excited or scared, or maybe a bit of both. I totally recognize that thinking. I'm exactly like that myself. So he offers some interesting tips. And indeed, most of the comments that I've seen on LinkedIn are highly congratulatory to him for writing that and sharing all of this. I haven't seen anyone saying this is rubbish and that's not what I would do at all. Maybe those people would read a piece like this, but it's all very supportive. And I find that the more you talk about this is my experience, particularly with people who are either just acquaintances for business or friends even, that I get a lot of the feeling that fits that either the 60% in the IBC group of I've actually rethinking how and why I work, or the 7% who said they feel stuck or disconnected from what actually matters in their lives. That's where I was, to be honest. So Martin's thinking, I think, is valuable. He shares some useful tips that I think are worth mentioning. Some of these, the stop relying on AI as a crutch is a really good one. We discussed that. He says, don't use it to take the easy way out, but to push you in directions you never expected. And that comes down to, like many of these things, a deliberate, purposeful choice you make on how you're going to do something. And not everyone can do it. And indeed, not everyone wants to do that. And I put you in that last bucket, Shel. You don't want to do that. You want to speed up, right? So embracing the blank page, that to me was something I've always done. Procrastination is also known as. Stare at it, stare at the blank page, doodle on it, procrastinate, start and stop, take a walk, meditate, do the laundry, work through it. I've done that a lot more recently that I didn't realize that was missing from what I was doing this with previously. Where if I do something like that, something in the process will trigger something that lets me then get through the blankness that's there. And I often find start and stop, taking a walk, doing something else is the route that works better for me. This one I particularly liked in one of his short thoughts from his changes that he's going through. Aim for even higher quality than before. So you do less, you spend less time on something, take more time doing it, and it's better quality than you did before. Well, that makes total sense, because if you're rushing stuff, the likelihood is high that it's not going to be as good as if you spent more time on it. Now, of course, that assumes you're able to do that, and not many people, not many people can do all of that.
Yeah, we got deadlines out here in the real world, you know.
You do, and you will have them also in this world. But not everything has to be drop dead. And indeed, this gives you a kind of an empowerment. You can make a choice that this report you're having to write, that is that you promise you'd get it to so-and-so by, in 10 days time or whatever, doesn't mean you have to drop everything and map it out right now, unless you want to do that, unless you're able to do that. So these are things that you can make decisions on. But to me, the key thing is determining what you want to do about your life in that case. And that's where it does come down to a quantifiable approach to it, to measure it, if you will. So I think he's come up, I think, with an honest assessment of where he's at, and it's prompted some further thoughts in his own mind on topics he can include in either his training or what he could write about in the future. So do you think this is representing the front end or the more visible part of a trend that among communicators who are choosing depth over frequency, so they're slowing down to produce better quality work? I'm not sure that's what I see, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is behind what some people.
Well, I think you could connect the dots between this particular treatise and what we're seeing with employees pushing back on full-time return to the office and preferring a hybrid schedule so that they can be at home. They want to be with their kids or take care of their elderly parents or what have you, not just not sit in traffic for a couple of days a week, as I did this morning behind a pretty gnarly traffic accident. Hence our recording a little late. But, I think people are reevaluating how they work, and organizations are going to have to come to terms with this. You look at reviews of companies on Glassdoor, and one of the biggest complaints you see is they're working us to death. Long hours, expectations that you're going to put in the time. And, I think there's another way to interpret this. What I like about this post, and by the way, Martin was on a panel I moderated at IABC World Conference in Toronto a couple of years ago. It was on AI. And somebody in the audience asked the question about using AI to write. Is that acceptable? And it was Martin who said that, most of what we do in communications just has to be good enough. So, if AI writes good enough, why is that a problem if it frees up your time to do other stuff? But the way you can interpret Martin's LinkedIn post, or the way I am choosing to interpret it, is I don't have to slow down. I can just slow down one thing in order to have the time to do the other. Give you an example. There are two of us in the communication department here where I work, and we were swamped. As people learned what we were capable of doing, we started to get more and more requests, and juggling them and not letting any of them fall between the cracks became a challenge. My boss suggested two things. First of all, she said, open a ticket system. We use ServiceNow, so we set up a ticket system, and anybody who calls us with a request, we say, please open a ticket. And then we can better manage and not lose track of everything that we have going. We have all the notes within the ServiceNow system that shows what's been done, what questions have been asked, what's been promised. But the other thing she said is you guys have to learn to say no. And in fact, if you want more resources, start saying no more often. And we've said, sorry, don't have the time to do that. We're too swamped, and I know it's important to you, but it doesn't rise to the level of a top priority for this department based on the expectations of leadership of what we're supposed to deliver. So saying no frees time. Now, does that time fill up? Yeah, but it fills up with things that need to be done that are more interesting, more exciting, more relevant. So, slowing down doesn't necessarily mean slowing down. It just means slowing down one thing in order to have time to do the other. Maybe it's more time with the wife and the grandkids. In my case, it's more time to do the work that matters and less time on the work that, to me, doesn't. So I think there are a number of ways that you can choose to interpret what Martin has presented for us.
I agree with that, Shel. And to repeat what you said earlier, each of us is different in what's important to each of us. So it's interesting you mentioned saying no, something I learned, and I actually put it into practice during the course of this year by turning down opportunities to secure paying work. I didn't do any of those things this year at all because they weren't the right fit. More simply, they weren't interesting enough and I didn't really want to do them. And so I didn't. And I felt great. And what else did I do instead? Well, I learned things. I read things. I wrote blog posts. I did things I wouldn't normally have had time for. I saw my grandkids more. As you said, my wife and I went out to lunch a lot more, visited places a lot more than we otherwise would have. And it's great. I sleep well at night now. Typically, I don't have the worries that I did before and the stress and all that kind of stuff. There are things I miss from this, but nevertheless, the balance of what I'm doing now outweighs any of that at all by a big margin. Martin looks ahead in his kind of concluding part. He wonders what comes next once we've mastered all the tools. When AI becomes mundane, he says, and the questions shift to meaning and impact, what might the next conversation look like in our field? And he asks, how can communicators lead the dialogue on quality, ethics, and human contribution in a world where automation is taken for granted? That's at the heart of a lot of what we've been talking about. And indeed, what I'm very interested in continuing conversations with. Sylvia Cambier and I have been talking about this. We talk about this quite a bit. What do we say to that where automation is taken for granted? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very consistent with the old Melbourne mandate from the Global Alliance for Communication Public Relations. I mean, this thing has been out for, a decade? But what it did was it put communication at the center of the organization as more or less the conscience of the company. Now, what the conscience focuses on varies depending upon the circumstances, but maintaining humanity in the organization seems to me to fit quite well in that particular model. And I think we need to be presenting our leadership with data that supports the need to do that and ideas about how to do that without losing whatever momentum the organization is trying to achieve or to maintain the momentum they have achieved. So I think it fits very well with that notion.
Okay. Well, we've got some good thoughts exchange here, Shel, and I'm wondering what our listeners might think of this. And if anyone has a perspective, a point of view, agreement or disagreement with anything we discussed today, let us know, please.
Yeah, you know where to reach us, and that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.